Okay, I wanted Rabbi Lazar to do a one session something special on Sukkot. And I just, his sort of wealth of exposure and experience is much broader than my own. And so today, even though he did not title the class this, I kind of like, what does your sukkah say about you? I'm simple. I have an agenda. And so we're going to learn about some of the really interesting messages communicated through sukkah decor through the last several centuries. And then just so you know, Rabbi Lazar is going to be teaching our next 4 weeks, a series, and which he'll share at the end what that is. So we're very excited about that too. Okay, David, thank you.
Hey, Chag Sameach, Moadim L'Simcha to everyone. It's good to be back and see familiar faces. I would have liked to have been sitting in my sukkah as well. Actually, Sasha, my wife, is out there talking to the kids in Israel and the grandchildren, but there's also the guys with the lawnmowers and the machines that make sounds are doing our garden today. So we'll have more quiet here, but good to see the faces. Some of you were with us or with me. You know what? I just got the message for, let me tell you what we're going to be doing now so we don't forget at the end in the next few weeks. The course is going to be called Encountering the Other Through Sacred Text. And I want to basically, this is an answer to Marcia's request from me. If I could share some of my interfaith experiences over the last 20 plus years, since 9/11, so it's 22 years that I've been kind of intensely involved in this kind of stuff, not just with Christians, mostly with Christians of different kinds in different places around the world, but also with some other faiths. And what I want to do is frame each set of experiences with a text. So there will be text. I don't know if I can guarantee sending the text beforehand. I will try to send you the text beforehand that you can print up, but otherwise we'll just toggle back and screen. I'll always make it available afterwards. But as you know, those of you who have been, studying with me before, text is really central to my life. Text is, for me, it's the engine, the oil that you put in the engine that allows the communication of people to come together. If I speak, for instance, yesterday I was in a church speaking at both services in a local Episcopal church. I would never imagine speaking in a church on a Sunday morning without relating to the text in their lectionary, the text that they read. It would never occur to me to speak in a synagogue without dealing with the text of the Torah portion. It's not so much a religious obligation. It's more that's where I found myself. Let's look at ourselves in the mirror. Let's exchange ideas with others. Allow ourselves to change through this tashtit, this foundation, or this arena, if you will. Maybe not a good word, but the playing field of the text. I'm not unique in that in any way. Much of what Rabbi Marcia has done with the JCOC has to do with that kind of approach. You have many different teachers, and what it should mean for all of you is that you take each of us with a grain of salt, and then with those grains of salts, then you season your own salad, right? So it's always good to listen to multiple teachers, get multiple views, and we can't all have those conversations in the same room together. Much like the Talmud gives a false impression, as if Rabbi so-and-so and Rabbi so-and-so are sitting together, and even though they lived at a span of 300 years and lived at a span of 1,000 miles from each other, it's as if they're still sitting in the same room arguing or debating some fine point of halacha or agadah in the Talmud. I think that's what we're meant to do as well, with all the voices that we've heard, we've read, but we have to do that work on our own. So sometimes the work comes in text. Long introduction about text, not just to talk about what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks in the interfaith aspect, but also text in what is text. We think of text, I think, as words, letters that come together to create words. Often in Hebrew, most of my work was in Israel, we call them mikorot, And mikorot don't necessarily mean text. Mikorot means sources. So often I'll refer to a sheet that we've given out before and as a source sheet, even though most of those sources are textual. But what I learned, about 20 years ago in my work in Tel Aviv, the chairperson of my congregation in Tel Aviv, Tiferet Shalom, a man named William Gross, is one of the major collectors of Judaica in the world, or private collection. And what I learned was sometimes we can learn a lot more from objects, antique objects, than we can from actual text with words that were written by, famous rabbis and philosophers and things like that. And I began already in 2001 to work with him on building presentations and presentations we held in private in our congregation for kids, for couples that were getting married, whatever the topic was. And then the years after I left Sweden in 2014, before I came to Palm Springs, I had some downtime. I needed to fill my time with something constructive. So I went through the 12,000 images that I had of his collection. Some of them are boring images, but pieces like, the title pages of books, silver textiles, brass objects, and I kind of categorized them different than the way he has categorized them in his own catalog to what I would want to teach about with him. And I came up with, after a few years, workshops, let's call it a workshop or a presentation for each of the holidays. One of those I actually did with some of you. I remember some of you were there at, I forgot the name of the synagogue in Irvine or Tustin, wherever we did it, when we taught in person before the pandemic. And I did one on Chanukiot. I'm pretty sure we did one on Hanukkah menorahs. So Susan, I remember you were there for sure.
That was, I think, when we were at Beth Shalom before COVID came. That's right.
Okay, so what we're going to do today are Sukkot decorations. By the way, I have one for future reference. I have one for on Rosh Hashanah greeting cards as well. What do you learn? What can we learn from these objects? I call them, for lack of a better word, folk art. Sometimes the folk art was done, the actual artwork was done by a professional, so maybe it's not folk art, but it's folk art from my own self-definition because you find it in a sukkah, you find it in people's homes. You don't find it in the museums or in pricey galleries, okay? So let's go through a number of the slides that I've prepared, and I'll try to connect them with different ideas. Some of them are in halakha, in Jewish law. Some of them are in agadah and what we think and feel about our Jewish tradition. Lots of them are purely sociological, teach us a lot about what's going through the minds of those that produced those articles and those that put them up in their sukkah. But all of these things, almost all these things, are sukkah decorations with a few exceptions. Anything does anybody would like to say before, or to point me in a certain direction before we go on? Oh, no, I guess that's all. Okay, just tell me, then we'll put another chair here. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So I'll take over the screen then, and this is, I hope everybody can see this properly. I won't be able to see your faces, I still haven't learned how to properly share a screen and then be able to see all the faces as well. So if you want to say something, and I don't see that hand, the bar, it does, especially when there's a background which brought with yellow, orange like this, I don't see the hand. So if you want to say something, just like an Israeli, speak out and interrupt me, okay?
Or just unmute and say, I have a question. Perfect.
Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, that's the difference between an American rabbi and an Israeli rabbi. Okay, so we're going to get to this particular decoration later on, but this is, the title, and let's take a look and see what we got. The first thing starts with something that needs to be mentioned anytime we deal with what we call Judaica. Judaica in Hebrew is known as Tashmishei Kedusha. I should probably put this on a slide. Tashmishei Kedusha literally means things of use for things of sacred use. Tashmishe kedusha, lishtamesh shamash. You know the word shamash as in the shamash who lights the candle on the Chanukiah. Even though that's I spoke about that then like another time. Even though that's actually historically not correct, it's called the shamash because you're allowed to use the light of that particular candle. Shamash means use. Shamash is also a euphemism for two things in rabbinic literature, and it's interesting that that's the word used. One is for sexual relations, the other one is for going to the bathroom, to the restroom. Both. So Beit Shimush, some of you may have grown up in Jewish summer camps or Israel, you don't use it anymore in Israel. A Beit Shimush is a bathroom, and in rabbinic literature, Tashmish Hamitah, the usage of the bed is a euphemism for sexual intimacy. But here is in Tashmishe Kedusha, which we call Judaica items, the principle that this is based on is actually a halachic principle, right? The words that many of you know from the Song of the Sea or from Psalms, the same line appears, or from the lovely what's her name? Shefa Gold's melody, Ohozi Vizimratia Vayehili Lishua. And we kind of mistakenly attribute it to song. The truth of the matter is the word Zimrat here is not from Zimral as in Zemer. We love to, that's our intentionality when we sing that. I think that's the beautiful, our strength is in our song or the song of God. But Zemer in Ugaritic is fortress. So it's really the Lord is my strength and might. The Lord is become my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine God. Ze Eli va'anvehu Elohei avi v'ramamenhu. The God of my father, and I will exalt him. So the parallel between God in both of that second half of the sentence and enshrining and exalt. The word to enshrine, anvehu, you could also translate it is to make it nice, to make it pleasant, to make it beautiful. And that is the proof text for this section in the Babylonian Talmud, as it was taught. This is my God, and I will glorify, anvehu. Beautify yourself before God in mitzvot. Even if one fulfills the mitzvah by performing it simply, it is nonetheless proper to perform the mitzvah as beautifully as possible. Make before God a beautiful sukkah, a beautiful lulav, a beautiful shofar, a beautiful ritual fringe, a talit, beautiful Torah scroll, and write in it in God's name in beautiful ink, with a beautiful quill by an expert scribe, and wrap the scroll in beauty silk fabric from Babylonian Talmud. I'm going to stop just the two pictures to dwell upon. One of the most beautiful pieces in Bill's collection, William Gross's collection, is the person I'm talking about in Tel Aviv, is this Eliyahu, Koshel Eliyahu. If you can see on the right how delicate is the work, the metal work here with silver and gold. Truly an exceptional item. The other one is a decorated shofar, which we don't see too much. We're used to seeing just natural shofarot. Let's take a break here before we go on, and so we can look at each other. What did people think all these years in buying beautiful talis bags and talitot and mezuzot and the kind of things that you find in the gift stores in your synagogue or in all the stores in Israel or wherever it is? What has been your intention, honestly, when you do those things? If anybody wants to speak up.
I'd like to speak up. My name is Yehudi Feldman. I'm living in New Jersey. After I read Agnon's story, her etrog, I never went out and bought myself a fancy etrog again. I just decided that basically, half the people are doing that, not really to be doing Hebrew mitzvah, to show off. So, but from that point on, I've always just, when they give you a choice between regular, fancy, whatever with most shoes do, I always just take medium, so that way I'm going to fit in with the crowd.
I love that, Yudi. That I'm like you, and thank you. Thanks for going right to what I was hoping would come out as a point. A lot of people, when they buy a fancy etrog, and we'll mention something about a modern Israeli movie a few minutes down the line, But when you think of people that have really ungepatscht, right, really fancy stuff for their mitzvot, right? Is it because it's the love of the mitzvah? Yes, in many cases it is, but very often it's a way of bragging, right? It's like, who's my etrog's bigger than your etrog. By the way, anybody ever seen a Yemenite etrog? Yemenite etrogs can be as big as a pineapple. It's a different
Wow.
species, and it's the most bizarre thing in the world, literally this big. So Ashkenazi, does it have a pitam on it? Does it not have a pitam? Does it need to have one? If it had a pitam and it broke off, then it's already not good. All these kinds of things, and that's just etrog.
Do they use them, or they just grow them?
No, they use them. They use them for
But you need two hands to hold them. So what do they? How do they
Yeah.
hold the loaf?
They
How
hold
do
it with two hands, just with two hands.
I don't understand. You need two hands just to hold up one of those.
No. You can put them together. I've done it. You can put one. You with the pressure between the lulav on one hand and the etrog on the other hand, you can keep it up. But
Okay.
Okay.
Let's not get stuck too much on the
Yes,
etrog. Ria.
Yeah, so I have an opposite point of view. I don't have a lot of tchotchkes because I live in an itty bitty place, but it is so nice. People have art in their homes. These are works of art, and it's just something, and especially if it's related to your spiritual life, I just think it's nice. And when I go into a sukkah that has all of these wonderful decorations, there's something uplifting and fun, and we don't have to be Puritans. And it doesn't have to be where I'm showing off how much I can spend on tchotchkes and stuff like that. It's just to surround ourselves with lovely, beautiful objects that relate to our religious life. I think it's nice.
No, it sounds to me like you're giving a paraphrase of what's in the Talmud in many ways. I think it's nice is a way of, in a spiritual way that you mentioned, is a way of God, of observance of God, of honoring God. But there is a certain tension there when you think of, Agnon stories or other stories, or people, if you've known people in the ultra-Orthodox world where there is a tremendous amount of money put into these things. I used to take the bar bat mitzvah kids when I was the rabbi in Ramot in the 90s. Every 6 weeks I took them out, it was a year course, and I took them out into the city. It's kind of cool to have Jerusalem as your classroom when you're teaching kids. And we would go to Mea Sharim before Pesach, and they would get to see a hand matzah factory, and they'd even get to help a little bit. And I knew the Haredim that owned and ran the matzah factory. And then we go by one of those windows in Mea Sharim of those stores with all these silver things, Torah crowns and yads and spice boxes and whatever they are. And they would see some of the prices. And they'd say, what, they would spend 3,000 shekel for that? And I would say, okay, before you judge them, what do you in your house spend 3,000 shekel on? And Eastern said, well, our TV costs 3,500 and our car costs whatever, and our security alarm, whatever the things that people, that's what they choose to spend their money on. There's something beautiful about that as well. Some of it may be art for the sake of art. Anyway, all these things are swimming in the background of what we're going to see today, but also people make statements with what they do. On one hand, they want to beautify their mitzvot, and I don't want to suspect them too much, but people also want to make a statement, same way that we make statements when we dress, or what kind of things we put up in the walls of our house. All right, so let's go back to the presentation and start looking at Sukkot. Oh, okay, so we start with our Bat Aminim. I think I would imagine familiar to everybody on the first day. You are to take branches from luxuriant trees, from palms, willows, and other leafy trees, and rejoice before the Lord your God. 7 days. Another class we can do, you've probably done it other times. How exactly did we get to the fact that we're using a citron that didn't even grow in the land of Israel at the time of the Bible? Was brought from other lands, from China or from India, don't remember which, but a faraway land in the east. The only ones that it says in the Torah is the palm frond and the willow, and how they got from myrtle, which grows on the hillsides, and all the possible symbolisms. That's not for today. We'll get back to Arbat Minim, but in itself, Arbat Minim are a thing of beauty. There's a beauty aspect in it. The word for that we use in etrog is Eitz Pri Hadar, the branches from luxuriant trees. By the way, the branches here imply that they go on the sukkah, as the Karaites understand this, by the way, and not to be held. But the idea that you find something which is from a beautiful tree, luxuriant is the translation here. Other translations, a beautiful tree. There's beauty involved in the mitzvah itself, even without adding something to it. So we look at a few decorations that you find, and these are from Bill's collection, which means they have some significance from a rarity point of view, and also his collection is famous in that it brings together from all parts of the Jewish world. That may not express itself in this particular case, but let's just see. I see there's something in the chat box. My friend is an artist. She thinks tefillin are visually unappealing and should be decorated. I disagree. Okay, good point, right? Beauty, of course, is in the eyes of the beholder. For some people, especially if you're a young boy growing up in an ultra-Orthodox home, what you want, you're waiting for your first pair of tefillin, big tefillin, beautiful, the squares, whatever. There's an aesthetic there. It seems that aesthetic, by the way, appeals less to female Jews than to male, because when you think of things that through the feminist movement in Judaism from the 1960s onwards, far more women put on talitot than they do tefillin. I'm talking about even women that go to synagogue on a regular basis. So there's something in the aesthetic there which is a little bit strange, but it only goes to show how subjective it is. Okay, so what do we find? We find
we could dump the boxes and go down back to the pouches they had in the time of the rabbis. The boxes are a relatively later thing. They, in a time when they wore tefillin all day, they didn't wear boxes. They wore little leather pouches, like you have on that. So it wasn't that uncomfortable to wear all day.
Okay, so good point. But so I was responding to somebody's comment about the aesthetics of tefillin, whether it's nice or not. So a common thing you have in a sukkah are things that are it's art, but it's also practical. And the practicality of it is that you have the blessing, because you're going to go out. It's not a blessing that perhaps you remember because you don't say it every day. So the blessing here, can I assume that everybody reads Hebrew here? Probably not, right? So the red here is the blessing over the Arbat Minim. The multicolored blessing here is Shechianu, that we say in the beginning of the holiday. Then there's a number of verses, and you shall take this. You find on a lot of decorations the text at the top and the bottom, the verse from the Torah from Leviticus, a picture of a lulav and an etrog, and then what do we have here? Anybody?
The 7 species.
Right, 7 species. What are they doing there? Not a trick question. I mean, what would that mean to you if you saw a poster with the 7 species in a sukkah?
Well, I think of Israel, but I'd also think of, I guess it would put my mind towards Israel.
Mm-hmm. Right. But just to remind everybody, or to let people know, the 7 species are, I'm going from the top, are chita, wheat, silra, oats, or barley, geffen, grapes, te'ina, figs, rimon, pomegranates, zayit, shemen is olives for oil, and dvash, which is not honey, bee honey, it is tamarim, dvash tamarim, a syrup that they would make out of dates. And so those are the seven indigenous species of the land of Israel from biblical times. And so to Rabbi Marcia, it reminds her of the land of Israel because in her mind, the 7 species belong to that, right? And I think that's definitely in the background of this artwork done in the 1960s in Ramat Gan, right? To kind of make this connection between where we're living now, the modern state of Israel, the ancient land of Israel with agriculture. Another reason? What do we
David
celebrate?
Master thinks that the pre-Lazar is really what's being met is the seventh species. In his book about etrog from China, David Master wrote a book with pictures about the theory that the etrog came from China, like you said, and basically ended up India, Persia, and in the time of after the Cyrus conquest, it ended up in Eretz Israel. But he also said that originally pre-Lazar could have met any one of the seven species.
Hmm, interesting.
An agricultural celebration.
I'm sorry. Again, could you say the last person? who said-
David Master.
An
in his book-
No.
agricultural
I heard about David Master. There was
that pre-Lazar could be a general term for all the fruits in the seven species.
Yudi, I understand. Somebody else said something afterwards that I missed.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry.
said it's an agricultural celebration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is Chag Asif, the earlier name or another name for Chag Sukkot is the feast of gathering all the agricultural produce in the land of Israel. The produce started with the annual harvest started in the springtime, Pesach time, with the wheat and then the barley, and then not necessarily in the order that you have it here in the picture, but each of these five tree, I'm going to call them tree fruits right now. And that began, you could bring the first fruits from the tree fruits from Shavuot onward. Not that they brought them on Shavuot, which is a common misconception in Israeli schools, but that was the time onward. And the time you could bring Bikurim was until Sukkot. But once you got to Sukkot, everything was in the storehouses, everything in the warehouses. And therefore, what do you do the day that was added on to Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret? What is that dedicated to? Anybody?
You pray for rain.
Right, pray for rain. So Simchat Torah thing, that only came in Babylon because only in Babylonia they read the Torah in an annual cycle. So that's a different development, but they could do it. They could add a holiday, so to speak, because they had the day for rain. So Shmini Atzeret, to my mind, is the most important thing. But overall, what I get out of this particular decoration which is why I would, if I had it, I would love to put it up in my sukkah. And we've had similar kinds of things that the children have made over the years. By the way, a comment about aesthetics, right? I'm guessing most of us have put up our children's and our grandchildren's and perhaps our great-grandchildren's artwork in our sukkah, right? And it may not be great art, maybe it's something that Bill Gross would collect for his collection, but it certainly has a lot of beauty for us, right? As in art, in the beauty in the eyes of the beholder. But I would love this because this does feel like Rabbi Marsha. I feel this does feel very Eretz Yisraeli. It's almost a nostalgic style. The way the letters are, the colors, it's a kind of Israel that I think some of us long for. To me, this says, I'm being totally subjective, this is like folk dancing in the square, public square on Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel. And we'll have a few of those as well. I think there's a nostalgia here, which I think is lost on many people. But colorful, colorful and reminiscent of Israel. And as a former farmer, as I was for a few years in my early adulthood, I totally love this idea. But back to the etrog. So Yudi mentioned that the history of the etrog could very well be any kind of those special species fruits of the land of Israel, but at some point became the etrog, and that etrog is a very expensive thing and needs to be watched over, cared for. So you have a genre of Judaica objects, which are etrog boxes that many of you have seen before. This happens to be a particularly lovely one from Holland. And it assumes, as many did in Ashkenaz, that the etrog has a pitam. And that we know today, I think everybody by now probably knows that not all etrogim, in fact, most etrogim don't have a pitam. And it's wise, especially when you have children in the house, to buy one without, because when the pitam does break, then it's a problem to say a blessing if you're observant from a halachic point of view. So go ahead.
How big was that box? Meaning not all etrogs, even of the same, like phylospecies, are the same size. Like That looks small to me. Like, how big was that? Like,
Yeah. So I remember it being about this big. I don't know if you can see what I'm saying, but I
Yeah.
remember it being in because I remember where it stands on the shelf. This is one of the things. Bill's collection is huge, and he has it all on shelves. Not all, much of it is on shelves in his home in Ramat Aviv. That's where we did a lot of activities over the years at his home. In any case, this though is for very wealthy people. Most Judaica that has survived, that we think of Judaica, the stuff that ends up in museums, unless now in more modern times, contemporary museums are I think better about this. If I can use the word better, is that not all artifacts belong to the upper 1%, right? But from a Jewish point of view, most Jews couldn't afford anything silver. When you think of Ashkenaz, certainly not, and most people were not wealthy people. So maybe they could afford brass. A famous example, this is with Chanukiot. One of the Chanukiot that I show in the presentation is made out of tin. These tin cups that are all rusty because so many people, that's what they had. And finally, in Poland, most people use potatoes to put their candles or their oil in for their light for Hanukkah. Anyway. So here's an older one. This is kind of one of the oldest pieces, and this is printed actually. This is or not printed. What do you call? I forgot what it's called. The woodcut, but it's not drawn. It's kind of stamped onto this paper. An early form of that, a kind of a printing, and the words that you see here are Kol Ezrach B'Yisrael. The words before every citizen or every member, every person amongst Israel shall sit in Sukkah with the famous Midrash Sifra, or the rabbinic writing that says Kol Ezrach. Well, that means men, but not women, right? And including converts and freed slaves. So there's a background to this, but eventually it came to mean women as well. In the more traditional world, in the Orthodox world, women are still not obliged to sit in the sukkah. Therefore, if the sukkah is small, it's the men that sit under the actual kosher part of the sukkah, and the women not necessarily. Today, more and more, I think people have found ways to have very large sukkahs so that everybody can sit there. But what's interesting here is the artwork around. How would you characterize the artwork?
It kind of looks. I'm not like with the cherubs and stuff. I'm sure they have meaning, like the wings. I guess my question to you about the artwork is that are each of these like a hint at like the covering and protective covering and how God, are they related to Sukkot, or are they just arbitrary?
So I would say they're arbitrary. And whoever put it up in their sukkah, maybe they gave them, maybe this becomes Gabriel Hamala or Raphael or one of the angels. Maybe that's who that becomes. Maybe it's the Kruvim. But if you look at the pictures, maybe there's what's it called? This looks like it's something to do with plenty, with vegetables. It's artwork. It's flowers, but no, I think it's just right out of whatever the printer who was doing this, he had these forms that he used, these things. Well, let's put some of these, and you see these in books all the time. In Jewish books, there's all these kind of things, and I think it's probably off on the wrong track if one starts to make, make a Megillah after of each of these different kinds of things. So the point being is that very often in Jewish folk art, there's just things that are considered to be aesthetic. Rabbi Marshall, do you know the archaeological site at Tzipori? Have you been there?
Yeah.
So one of the famous mosaics in Tzipori is a nilometer. Do you remember that? There's a beautiful mosaic of what's called a nilometer. Is something on the Nile that was where, like when you go in the mountains, you have those poles that tell you how much it snows.
Yeah.
Or in a pool that says how deep it is. So there's something called the nilometer, which became an a motif in art for some reason. And it's on the floor. It's on the mosaic in Sephora of somebody's house. They said, why would there be this motif that talks about measuring? It's beautiful. I mean, it's aesthetic. It talks about measuring the water of the Nile on the floor of a house in the Galil. And the answer that I was given, or the guide who brought us there when I first saw it years ago, was because the guys who did the mosaics, they had these books of examples, like a interior decorator shows you the tiles or the fabrics or whatever it is, and says, "Oh, I want one of those. I want one of those in my kind of thing." And think about all the art that we see in movies or sometimes in people's homes, people that are suddenly very wealthy and they weren't, and they have all these kind of bizarre things in their homes. That's kind of the thing. So basically, there were standard pieces that were used in printing to adorn things. And I wouldn't give them, I would not give them meaning. Bill is much more skeptical than I am. He said he gives them no meaning whatsoever.
Okay.
We can give them meaning, right? But that's perfectly, but to go back and say it was produced for that reason, this was just, we're looking for something to put up on the sukkah. It's not great art. It's very, very standard, very cheap. Something like this. Not a lot of work went into it. This one is particularly.
That's from Habakkuk.
I'm sorry?
That's Habakkuk. Why would a person put a pasuk like that? Oh, it's
Very
from the
good.
hill. I'm sorry, I
Excellent.
messed it up.
Excellent question, but why don't you go ahead, Yudi? Why don't you read the English so that there's a lot of people here that don't.
I'm sorry, you're right. The fiercest of men shall acknowledge you when you gird on the last bit of fury.
Right, from the Psalms. And as Yudi rightfully asked, like, why would anybody put that verse up in their sukkah if they want to welcome people, right? Isn't this the opposite of Bruchim Habayim, welcome, right? So that's why I have this here. I'm totally intrigued by this, and
Messianic, maybe. Remember, the Haftorah on Sukkot are two of them are heavy-duty Messianic. Maybe the idea is something along the lines of 12 Chamascha at the Seder. In other words, I'm just guessing.
Yeah. So that would be very much in somebody who is that's a kind of almost a yeshivish kind of an answer background to this.
Well, that's what I am.
No, that's fine. I have an also semi-yeshivish from my background. I think it has to do with when let me pause for a second because I hate this because I can't see people. I'm afraid of losing. When all of us think of we've studied the laws of putting up a sukkah. Has anybody done? Have you done anything like that, Marcia? Has that been in any of the?
I haven't studied with this group those laws. I mean, but and I don't know. Okay. I think there's a varied range of.
So
what I just wanted to ask, do you mean when there's a Talmudic discussion about how high it could be?
What's kosher, exactly.
Yeah, we did this last Saturday, and it's very funny. And my son did a while back. It was a spoof on it of how many can you sit in it, and people's tushies were out of the sukkah, but their head was in it. It was just very funny.
Oh, no, that's a serious discussion.
And the other thing is, I wanted to know, a lot of this stuff you're showing us has a very Christian take to it, like the figures of human figures, and so maybe it's the same thing as the interior decorator who came with the Nile measurement thing, and the homeowner says, I'll take this and I'll take that, and so then the printer has all of these stuff that has no meaning to the printer. Then people go, I'll take this, that, and those, right? So it's very funny, I think.
So yeah, sometimes I think of like a Dr. Seuss book, a sukkah on top of a sukkah and balancing on this. Okay, but in those laws, so we know that you have to have three sides, right? In those laws, we know that this is about how high it can be. Do you remember why that's important? Sorry.
Something about beyond a certain height, and it's no longer and then it becomes more of a house and not this temporary dwelling. It loses its concept of being temporary.
You're almost there. It's more because it's the point the higher you get, the shade of the sukkah is provided by the
Oh,
walls
that's right.
and
Oh,
not
yeah.
by the
By the
Schach.
roof. Yeah, by the,
schach.
Schach.
Now,
I also
well,
thought the other reason just for that is that the taller it is, the more, I mean, the more sturdy it would have to, I mean, I guess that's not necessarily true, but you know, when you're dealing with a taller structure, it needs to be sort of more firmly implanted for it to be, you know, not, you know, at risk or something, but maybe that's more of an engineering look, and maybe that's not correct.
well, it's not a question of what's correct. The Talmud goes in the direction of saying because you don't get shade from the sun if it's in that position. In that same part of the study, if you build a sukkah under a tree, it's also not kosher for that reason.
I
Now,
see.
now we go to the how much schach do you need? When many of us grew up, there was a misconception, which was absolutely common, that you have to see the stars through your schach. Anybody grow up with that? I think there's.
That's absolutely desirable. That's not the same.
I know. So you didn't grow up in the liberal world, right? In the liberal Jewish world, I'm assuming you didn't. But liberal
The
Jewish world,
yeshivish world.
yeah. So in the
Mainstream yeshivish world.
in the liberal Jewish world, there is somebody that produces these things that become Torah Sinai. One of them, by the way, is the tattoo in the being buried with the tattoo in the Jewish cemetery. These things that have no basis whatsoever in halakhic literature, and yet they become, you know, you can't use a yortzeit candle for something else other than for a memorial candle. Okay, what's the thing? It's actually the opposite. As Yudi can tell us, the halacha is that you have to have more shade than light that gets through. And the key word that's used in all that is the word for the sun, which is not shemesh in this case, it's chama. The chama is the sun. And I think that might be the connection here. I'm going back to the picture. Oops. I think that might be the connection, that the association that somebody made between the sukkah and chamat adam here means the fiercest of men, but it comes from the word fire and heat and the sun. That might be a connection.
Oh,
You like that, Yudi?
cool. Yeah, except that it's not shot, but other than that, it's cool.
It's, of course, it's not shot. It's a pilpul. Anyway, if we look around, yes, the figures are very much, even Moses and Aaron, they don't look terribly Jewish. Moses, you know, has always got his horns / rays of light from his head. He's got the 10 Commandments and his staff. Aaron has got his incense and his Urim V'Tumim and the ephod, and then various other. The picture here though is the Eish Tukat, it's the Eish Tamid, it's the fire on the altar in the Beit HaMikdash. Again, heat, fire, sun, shade. That's where my mind went in all this. And then you have these classical things from the kind of art that you know from Italy and from Europe in that particular time. That not everything has a meaning. Some of it is just the way that you do it. I love this. This is just a great poster in my mind. The way they were produced, by the way, it's not all that interesting. This is a huge piece of paper because it's these, he calls them plaques. I would call them posters, but the name for them in the professional name in Judaic is plaques. These are large. Each one of these would be the size of a poster. So this is the one that's come out of the printing press before it's been cut, as you can see from the things here. And this is a common motif. What are we looking at? Anybody?
Are you talking about the Hebrew, the priestly blessing? What are you with different images?
What are many of the pictures before we get to the priestly blessing?
Oh, they're
Sacred
all
sites.
sites in Israel.
Holy sites in Israel. That's a very common thing. So around this, and this is ironic, of course, and I may have spoken this before. I've got a separate presentation just on how Jerusalem was presented over hundreds of years before Zionism actually, and even after the advent of Zionism. This is what so many Jews thought of as the Beit HaMikdash for hundreds of years, as the temple in Jerusalem, even though what's it a picture of? Upper right-hand corner, what's that a picture of? A real picture?
The mosque.
Yeah, Axamos.
The mosque
Yeah,
up
right.
on the
Yeah.
Or
mountain.
it calls them
Dome
a
of the
coma
Rock.
as such.
The Dome of the Rock, right, okay. So this is Kever Rachel Imenu's grave. This is Kever Rambam Maimonides' grave, which is, I don't think it's true. It's a place near Tiberias. I don't think it's historically true, but I'm not an expert at it. I can't read, once I would be able to read each of these. I'm sorry, I didn't prepare this enough that, this is Joseph's grave in Shechem. This is in the Vadi between the temple, between the Har HaBayit and Mount Zaytim. Each of these things this is Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes, his grave. And so each of these are actual places. This is the grave of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in what's it called? Near Oranim. Beit Sharim. The only one which is not a place that was known by Europeans as places of pilgrimages, either because they're biblical sites or they're rabbinic sites, is this one here. And this is a picture of the Akedah of Isaac being and the angel preventing him. Now that could be because all he had was he had more room on the paper and he ran out of sites. It's hard to know exactly how he decided that would be the last picture. Sometimes it's very, very minimalist, right? The art is very minimalist. Did anybody figure this out?
So I just want to say, right, so the top lines are an acronym for the beginning of every formulaic blessing.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Right. And it's a good way of putting on paper something maybe you don't want to put God's name, but it's in a very simple art form, very naive kind of an art form, right? It looks like something that your fifth grader might have prepared in school, perhaps.
Or me. It's like, and I think it's some of it is very self-consciously folk art, because this is
Those three triangles there to show it's an abbreviation.
Hold on, we were in the middle of something. Hold on.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, continue what you were saying. Sylvia.
I think that a lot of this is self-consciously folk art, or based on folk art, to make us to bring us back to that time in a more simple way, in an agrarian way, because it's an agrarian holiday.
Right. So this would be the opposite of that fancy silver etrog box, right?
Right.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. What did you want to say?
I just asked if those three little squares on top of each one of the first three words mean to tell you it's an abbreviation, an acronym?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the same way we use a Gershaim.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to verify that. I never saw that.
It's just an artistic way. You see those things in manuscripts. You see different ways of doing that. Sometimes it's dots above the word. So it wasn't always assumed by everybody the way we do today that it's with a Gershaim. Now this is what I would call an ungepatched one, rather old, hard to see it all. Let me see if I can.
As you walk into the sukkah.
Yeah. So a lot of these things are these prayers, the Yehi Ratzon prayer, that made the sukkah work the way it's supposed to work. And what the people are thinking about in these cases mostly is no longer agriculture. What they're thinking about is more, as Yudi said before, and more in messianic terms, as Chag HaSukkot that turned into a promise of the future, and we'll see a good example of that. Why? But what I wanted to contrast is between this is for what Sylvia just said about the last one. How come I'm having trouble with this? Sorry. This is Sia Pashtut, right? This is the most simplified in folk art, and this would be on the other end of the spectrum. Would you not say, Sylvia?
Yes, this is very elaborate and very professional.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And another example of something very aesthetic, very beautiful. Let's just talk a little bit about the what we see here. Again, it's the blessing over in this case, the blessing over drinking wine. I think most people on the call know Birkat Hamazon, benching after you have a meal that has bread in it, a full meal. You know, da 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 da, and then there's a short blessing after you've had water or a piece of fish or not a meal. I know fish sounds like it would be a meal, but a piece of fruit, whatever. Borei Nefashot, it's called. That's the name of the blessing. And then there's a mid-sized blessing for when you eat anything from the Shivat Aminim, from the things of when you eat, say, not bread, mizonot, cake or crackers, or when you eat olives or grapes or figs, any of those, and this is that blessing. Me'ein Sheva, it's called, and Me'ein Shalosh, I should say.
It's also in the Haggadah at the end of the fourth cup. That's the way
Exactly right.
everybody
Some
recognizes it.
Right, people would know it if you get that far in the Haggadah. After
David, David, are these are these all Davka sukkah decorations, or are these other things that were put in a sukkah but would be in somebody's home, maybe framed on a wall? Do you know what I mean? Are they always for sukkah? How do you know they're for sukkah?
Good question. So if you see something that relates to the sukkah, you can assume it is a sukkah decoration. Perhaps this was in a family and it was passed down. I'd have to ask Bill, or I'd have to look in the description in his catalog to see why this was classified under a sukkah decoration. We're going to get to an interesting question about a mizrach in a second.
David?
Yes.
Last Thursday night, I heard a lecture by, I forgot the name first, but she was talking about the inside walls of Sukkot in Germany. They would decorate all the inside walls with any single prayer you might end up having to say in the Sukkah. So the idea was, instead of having to bring Sidurim and stuff, they'd have it on the wall the way we have a lot of Shul Moden, Barabban and stuff like that, quick. So what they would have is, you know, one would have Kiddush, and another wall would have Brach Achlama, which is what you're showing now, and another wall would have, you know, don't ask Birkat Hamazon. I don't know. The bottom line was all the walls were decorated that way, and pretty much that way nobody ended up could just read it right off the wall without having to basically.
Good point. Thank you. That indeed.
She showed pictures of it too.
Right. Okay. So that kind of answers your question, Rabbi Marsha.
Okay.
I want to get
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, Sylvia. One of the interesting things about this particular decoration is that the middle text, and in a lot of texts that I've seen, like the Talmud or even the Sidurim, the middle is the text and the margins are marginalia. A lot of times poems or commentary or whatever. And this is kind of like artistic commentary.
Yeah, it is, except for are King David and King Solomon necessarily commentary on that blessing. So another way to go would be to say that on so many of this is very reminiscent of a book title page. On so many of them we have David and Solomon. I know it's David because it has a harp. I know it's Solomon mostly because it says here Sefer Mishlei Shlomo. These are the proverbs of Solomon. It could be the name of the author of the artist. It could be all sorts of things. Often it's Aaron and Moses. The lions are you know, we've talked about as a messianic. This looks like more like a Shabbat table, a Seder, whatever it might be. And I forgot what this might be. I forgot what I once had an interpretation for that as well. But basically, that I think what Yudi said is a good way for us to think of all these different things. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I don't want to go too long and see different kinds of things. You often get a poster which welcomes you to the sukkah. Maybe it's on the outside, maybe it's the first thing you see when you go in. But what I wanted to talk about here is a tendency in the 20th century, after the Enlightenment, and after the reality of secular Jews, not so much reform and then conservative, that was more of a German and then North American kind of a thing. But in things that were produced in Israel, in Jerusalem, as souvenirs, they always fall back on the Haredim, the Yerushalmim, the echte Yerushalmim, the way that they would dress, with the shtreimel, with the gold striped coats. That's a particular Jerusalem way of Haredi dress, not necessarily Hasidim. Some are Hasidim, some are not. It's a complicated history, but this idea that if you have something in Judaica, you fall back on Orthodox Jews doing it, was something that many of us have kind of rebelled about. The local federation was putting out, after the pandemic started, they started putting an email every week where you could find prayers online. And they were using pictures from Chabad prayers. And I know why they did that. They did that so that nobody would be upset. I said, you can't do that. Most of the people that are going to synagogue in the Coachella Valley are praying together. So what they do now is they alternate, right? But this tendency, I think Rabbi Marsha knows exactly what I'm talking about, to go to the Hasidic Jew as the, par excellence. All right, so you asked before, Ria, I think I saw a comment ask you about what happened to the prohibition of human faces. It's not really, it's one of those myths, not a 20th century myth. Let me take a break here to see everybody. It's not a 20th century myth, but it's a myth that's grown. There was Jewish art with human faces all the way through. The best example is 3rd century Dura Europos. There, a synagogue whose walls were decorated with these frescoes with human faces. We've always had human. There are those that say you can't, but it's never been an absolute taboo, except for in the lands of Islam. In Islamic world, then the overall culture did not allow for those things. So if you look at ketubot, for instance, from last few hundreds of years, there are some extremely bizarre. Bill has a ketubah in his collection that has pictures of the people getting married on the ketubah itself, which is, to me, seems or other people. Think of now, think of that whole business in the ultra-Orthodox world of rabbis, pictures of rabbis in homes. That's the artwork, right? So that misconception is based a lot on Chaim Potak's book, My Name is Asher Lev. Right. So that tension between being an artist and being in that way. So, but in Islam, though, they were very careful. Not in Islam, in where Jews lived under Islam, then you only see geometric, sometimes maybe animals without faces, but mostly geometric shapes. And I bring that up now because of this particular decoration. So this is from Algeria, 20th century, and now I know there's other posters from Ashkenaz that don't have, but this very specifically, has no, after the previous ones, has no faces. It's different geometrical things, other than perhaps when you ask children, they usually say this looks like Nerot Shabbat, Shabbat candles, but it may also somehow be connected to a palm tree or the lulav, not really sure what it is. And then you have this is a dedication, something we're used to see on things in synagogues. This thing is on Torah, things that decorate the Torah scroll, something in memory of something. So this is a decoration that is really a Shana Tova poster, a good year, and there's a dedication to a father of a family. I used to know. I see. Oh, I have. I didn't find my notes for this lecture. I used to know probably who this was. Maybe Khatam Sofer or the Ktav Sofer, somebody from the Sofer family. Or no, I'm confusing that with another picture. I don't think that this is not the name of the rabbi. This is the name of the artist, I'm pretty sure. In any case, besides having a picture of a Rebbe in your sukkah, and having the prayer for those that come into the sukkah, which is not the bare bones liturgical prayer, something added afterwards, probably under the influence of Kabbalah and kavanot of mitzvot, then you start to have these different posters of things that you do every day, which are the ushpizin, the guests that come to this. And this brings us to Yudi's or not Yudi, somebody's comment about buying an etrog. I think Yudi. Have people seen this movie, Ushpizin?
Yes.
Yeah, I swear.
This is one of the best movies that Israel ever put out, in my opinion. One of the best Israeli movies. And the etrog that he has there cost 1,000 shekel, and these people didn't really have what to eat. So just a word about ushpizin. You've heard the word before. It means the guests that we invite into our sukkah. It comes from the Latin hospice, which gave us in English hospice and hospital, and to be hospitable, right? So the word in Latin is hospice. In Persian is aspan, which means an inn. And Aramaic took from both Latin and Persian, even those two languages are not necessarily, they're not related, but it could be there was a cross pollination there, or maybe even coincidental. And Aramaic gave us the word ushpiz, is to be a guest, and ushpiza is an inn, a hotel. In
When
Hebrew,
did this start, David? This whole idea of welcoming, is this
We're gonna get to it.
medieval? Okay.
we're going to get to it just a second. So just in Hebrew, we use the word ishpuz for hospitalization. Interestingly enough, litashpez, right? To be hospitalized. Then finally, we use the words hospitality, host, hospice, hostel, hotel. So that's just something I like to point out to people, that ushpizin, as exotic as the word sounds, it's actually quite common in the languages that we speak. So let's go ahead to let's take all these are examples of ushpizin. This one is a cross between the names, calling in the names. We're going to get to the source in a second from the Zohar. Calling the names of ancestors to come and be visitors on Sukkot, and this is crossed with the genre of holy sites in Israel. A different way of doing it, of pictures, ushpizin crossed with pictures from biblical literature. By the way, I can send this to anybody that wants this. I know I'm going fast now, but we're really towards the end of our time. So here it is. Do you want to read this for us?
It's cut off on one end. I don't know if I'm
Okay.
the only one who had
So,
that.
Rabbi Marcia, could you read this for her?
Of course. Come from the Zohar. Come and see. When one sits in this dwelling, the shade of faith, Shekhinah, spreads her wings over her from above. Abraham and 5 other righteous heroes come to dwell with him. Rabbi Abba said, Abraham, 5 righteous heroes, and King David dwell with him. As it is written, 7 days dwell in Sukkot. 7 days, it says, not for 7 days. Similarly, it is written, 6 days, Adonai made heaven, made heaven, Exodus 31. Day after day, one should rejoice with a radiant face along with these guests who abide with him. And Rabbi Abba said, it is written, 7 days dwell in Sukkot, then shall dwell in Sukkot. First dwell, then shall dwell. The first is for guests, the second for human beings.
Okay, so this is a lovely idea. We hear about ushpizin all the time, ushpizin, and we're taking these, and we'll get to some modern renditions of this as well. But I think this is considered to be the earliest literary source. I may be wrong, but so if you go according to academic opinion of the Zohar, we're talking about 13th century. If you go according to yeshivish dating of the Zohar, we're talking about the Tanaim, already the first few centuries of the Common Era. So that's the custom that is developed, and you can see even from the source itself, it took some time to work it out. Are we just inviting ancestors come be with us, or are we going to give them each one their own day? And then you got to change it a little bit. So the interesting thing, and this is what we're going to end with, from my point of view, the lovely part about this is this ongoing way of, again, combining different things. The kiddush, all the things come together here. as was said, you don't want to have to bring a shlepa prayer book out. So you have the Kiddushas here, you have the Ushpizin here, and you've got the Kotel HaMaravi. His date is 1935. I'm a little skeptical about the date because it seems like this is a post-67 picture, but the Kotel wasn't so nicely cleaned up in those days, I think, although we'd have to, look at things. This one I love, of course, because who's at the bottom? Anybody recognize that large fish at the bottom?
Is that Leviathan or
Exactly,
Nahash?
Leviathan, that's Leviathan. Why do you have a picture of the Leviathan in a sukkah?
Was it from the Midrash?
Yeah,
No.
in the days to come, Bo'elam haba, we're going to eat from the tzaddikim are going to eat from the flesh of the Leviathan in a sukkah that's made from the skin of the Leviathan. Right, so that's how Leviathan gets in the picture. The lions are always a symbol of the Mashiach because of the tribe of Judah. The eagle, maybe because of saving Israelites on eagle's wings, maybe because you have to fly swiftly like an eagle to do mitzvot. Again, charedim. So here, get those charedim doing this stuff in, get it in, and then just kind of romantic Eretz Yisrael, Middle Eastern kind of Orientalism kind of approach. But so now go ahead. This is also said in the Zohar, and this brings me to this idea of ushpizin. Go ahead.
One must also gladden the poor, and the portion that would otherwise have been set aside for these ushpizin, these guests, should go to the poor. For if a person sits in the shadow of faith and invites those guests and does not give their portion to the poor, they all remain distant from him. Is the him God? Well, we'll ask. One should not say, I will first satisfy myself with food and drink, and I shall give the leftovers to the poor, but rather the first of everything must be for one's guests. If one gladdens his guests and satisfies them, God rejoice over him. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and others shower him. Okay, no.
Okay, let's just quickly go ahead to some. I mean, that's the bulk of the art that I think in the collection is about ushpizin. Maybe I spend too much time on this one. Gotta love this. I would have thought it was Israeli, but I have a feeling it's an Israeli who was living in Montreal. But kind of combining all the different things that we saw and all the different things. Let's try to get it into one poster. But now we get to the last two ones I want to show you. This one is really interesting. 1955 in Israel. This is a gift that was sent to, how you get calendars from Chabad and synagogues and mortuaries, or you get something. You used to get things from charities in Israel, Beit Yitomim, orphanage, things like that. So this is the Pol Mizrachi, right? Some of you may remember like my grandmother used to make a luncheon for the Pol Mizrachi, right? She was an Orthodox woman, but this is the Orthodox Zionist youth movement. These were not the anti-Zionists. These were the rabbis that did eventually sign on to be part of the Zionist movement, even some of them before the state. Rav Kook, of course, died before. That's the right hand. This is the most famous picture here, probably Rav Kook. And so they want to give you also the prayer and the ushpizin and these rabbis to inspire you and the traditional symbols. This says a gift for Sukkot, but what they really want to give you is what's in the middle here?
It says Seder Ushpizin.
No, what is, can you see my cursor circling something?
A bet.
In blue, a bet.
The bet.
Anybody know what that is? Sasha, you don't know what that is? Oh, come on. Oh, so, okay, the truth that I would expect Sasha.
It was on the tzedakah box, and that when we were kids, we'd go around to get donations. It was for, wait a second, it's in my brain. I can't access it.
Karen something. Is
No,
that what you want to say? Karen,
No,
yeah.
so you're talking about Karen. So Karen Kayem, and so that's the tzedakah box. But no, but I'm talking about something else. I wish I had one to show you. In America, how do we vote? We go to the
The poll, we go to the poll.
and what do we do once we get there?
The ballot box.
Well, we
Oh.
either
Have a ballot
we used to
box.
poke, maybe we poke holes in something, or we write on something and we color it in with a pencil. Or, so in Israel, has anybody else voted here in Israel? How do we vote in Israel, Sasha?
Well, you have a ballot with a not, with a letter on it.
You get an envelope, and there in each ballot box, there's a big tray with like 20 different pieces of paper with a letter or 2 or 3 letters that symbolize each of the parties. You can only put one in your envelope, and Bet was the letter for the religious the Orthodox party.
Oh my God, we would never have known that.
It's
Yeah, how would we
absolutely,
have known that?
it's election propaganda. It's spectacular as an example. I love it. I love this so much. It's like, you can tell how much I love it. Okay, but I'm disappointed that Sasha doesn't remember.
No.
That means that, well, there was a time you probably voted. I maybe voted once for that party. I got into trouble because we lived in a Pol Mizrahi Moshav, and I voted for another party, and they could tell because they looked at the votes, each of the parties, they can see every polling place, how many votes, they see who did, but there were like, there were 30 of us, right? So 29 votes went for Bet, and 1 vote went for everybody else, and they knew it was me. Anyway, okay, but this is also a lovely one, right? Perhaps you've seen this in the last few years, Rabbi Marsha or others. This is a game or to Ushpizot, just actually female Ushpizin. So this is Rachel, the poet, and Rachel, the matron, and Leah, the poet, Leah, the matron as well, and Chana, yeah, and Golda Meir, yeah, Zelda the poet. So it's a lovely way to update, I think, this particular custom, and I want to thank both Bill and Lisa Gross for allowing me always to use their collection to do this kind of teaching, which is very different. What I wanted to say with all this is that I'm a text guy. I spent a lot of years in yeshiva and university. I love books. I'm in Jewish texts all the time, and the kind of texts that are, I don't know a lot about art. I know almost nothing about art history or music or world. I don't have a liberal arts degree, but I continue to learn things from books, but a lot can be learned from real life stuff. And this is real life stuff. And it's not necessarily like that etrog box from the upper echelon of people who are usually creating and preserving art. This gets us down lower than we usually might be in taking a look at what was going on with our people over the last few hundred years on this Chag HaSukkot.
David, this was such a fun way to feel like we were in the Sukkot through the ages, which was exactly what I was hoping for. This really special stuff that was new to me. I hope you all enjoyed this, and we'll have a chance to sit and, I have very, unimpressive, simple sukkah with no decorations, which speaks to the fact that I have no time. That's what my sukkah says about me, which is that I didn't have any time to invest except to get it up. But anyway, I want to wish everybody a wonderful holiday. Moadim l'simcha. We're very excited to learn with you again, and a new series starting next week. And thank you so much, everybody. So wonderful to see all of you. Yehudi, I'm glad you joined us. And to you too. Okay. Chag Sameach, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.